Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week we're going to cover some basic lubricants that every homeowner should have, where to use them, and then we spoke to Larry from Liquid Wrench. I want to thank Vincenko232, who gave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. So one of the first popular lubricants was the 3-in-1 oil, the liquid, and you can pretty much find it everywhere. In 1894, George Cole wanted to create the best bicycle oil that would lubricate, prevent rust, and clean the chain. So he created this formula, and it became so popular that in 1899 he incorporated and started a company selling it. And the first containers were small green glass bottles, and they used a cork to keep the liquid in. Funny, huh? In 1910, they turned it into, they put it in metal cans with a screw cap, and then they slowly went to that kind of iconic little spout, the little plastic spout.
Right.
And we always had that. In 1995, WD-40, the company, bought 3-in-1 oil.
Oh, really?
Yeah, interesting. So now they're part of the same company. But we always had this around the house, and my dad, did nothing. I mean, he lived, we lived in apartments, my whole childhood, and he always had a 3-in-1 oil underneath the sink. I remember, and he used it on hinges anywhere where there's a squeak. My grandpa had the old metal cans; they were all rusty, and we used it, for everything. So it was, probably one of the more popular oils that you could find.
So what are the 3 things it does again?
So for bikes, it would lubricate, prevent rust, and then clean the chain.
So does it do this for everything?
Everything. Cleans, protects, and lubricates. That's why it's so fantastic. So you can use it on tools, hinges, nuts and bolts, bicycle chains. In 1941, Liquid Wrench came out with their main product, which was a penetrating oil. In 1953, WD-40 started, and their first formula was to create a degreaser and a rust preventer for the aerospace industry. So the WD stands for water displacement, and it took 40 attempts before they perfected their formula. So that's where the WD-40 came from. And
it's a good thing it didn't take like 57 or 63.
107. So the first WD formula was actually used to protect the outer skin of the Atlas missiles. So it protected them from rust and corrosion, and those were the first ICBM missiles.
What's that?
So intercontinental ballistic missiles. There's different types, and the first ones were designed to have a 3,400 mile range. So they put a nuclear weapon into this.
Nice.
And it can go 3,400 miles. And then in 1958, WD-40 started packaging the product for homeowners. So it became so popular. I guess a bunch of the scientists and the people working on the Atlas program loved this product so much that they started taking some of the bottles that they would bring for the missiles and start bringing it home, and then they were sharing it with their neighbors, and then they're telling the inventors, this stuff's great, all around the house. And so in 1958 they said, hey, here's another line of income. So their formula has, and everybody talks about, is it really a lubricant? What right. is it? And so their formula, they say, has lubricants in it, anti-corrosion agents. It has ingredients to penetrate. It has a couple chemicals that displace water, and then it also breaks down soil. Pretty interesting combination of ingredients. And then in 1957, PB Blaster started, and they have another penetrating oil that became really popular in hardware stores.
So you're going to the store because you need to buy a lubricant.
Okay.
You get into that aisle, and there is a million different choices. There's all these different companies, these different size bottles, different names. Shapes of bottles.
Yeah, confusing.
So can you break it down? What are the different types of lubricants?
So I think there's some key things you need to look at the label just to identify what the lubricant is. One is a dry graphite, and this is excellent for interior locks. In fact, on our Fix It Home Improvement channel on YouTube, we did a couple videos on those. Fantastic for interior locks because it doesn't gum up the little pins, and we talked about on the door lock episode, these tiny little pins if you put other oils in there, it can actually attract dust. And then if those pins aren't moving easily, then your key's not going to work. Dry graphite will bond to rubber, metal, wood, plastic, so it's just excellent for anywhere where it's dry. It's actually a great thread lube. Anything metal to metal, graphite is excellent. Then you have penetrating oils, so like Liquid Wrench or PB Blaster. They use this action where the oil will actually follow the threads. It'll work its way up the threads. It'll break down rust, and it will break loose, nuts and bolts that are stuck together and locked in place. And these type of oils aren't really designed for lubrication. So they're designed to break loose the bond, like if you have something stuck, and then you would use a different lubricant on it. And in fact, if you used, something like a dry graphite in the threads, in a lot of cases it'll keep it from seizing and being stuck. And one trick, if you're using penetrating oil, one thing that we worked with, especially when we had our small engines repairman, he would use a penetrating oil on nuts and bolts that he was trying to remove. He'd let it set, and then he would tap on it for a few minutes with either a hammer or a wrench, and that helps work that penetrating oil down the threads.
Well, it's actually, who used to do the demonstration? Was that PB
Blaster at the hardware shows?
Right, yeah.
So they would...
I mean, it just this big rusted bolt, and then they just spray it on there, and you watch it.
Amazing. Watch it crawl up the threads. So very cool how they're designed. And then
this
you
is
have
the excitement at hardware shows.
They are all standing around.
Everybody gather around.
This is the best hardware show ever. Did you see that? And then
We're simple folks.
And then you have an all-purpose oil, so like a liquid all-purpose oil, like a 3-in-1. It stays wet. What's nice about something like this is, especially with that little spout that they have on their bottle, is you don't have an overspray. So like with some of the liquid lubricants, you're spraying and it can get all over and drip all over. You can kind of control how much you put on. And an all-purpose liquid oil is great for, lubricating, cleaning, protecting, but anywhere where you need this to stay wet. So, like on a fan, you would want, or ball bearings where you want that to stay wet. And then you have a dry lube, and what's nice about these, most of them are spray on wet, but then they dry to a powder.
Right.
And then you have to look at what's in this dry lube. So you're either going to have something with Teflon, and the chemical abbreviation is PTFE, and that's just the chemical abbreviation it stands for polytetrafluoroethylene.
Making my sister proud.
And they say that it is one of the slipperiest materials in existence.
That's a word?
Slipperiest?
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up. We'll let you know on the next episode. But they say that it's so slippery, it's like wet ice on wet ice. That's a kind of a scientific way of explaining it. It resists moisture.
My sister not so proud now.
And what's nice is, especially Teflon, it's safe on most surfaces, but if you're using a dry lube, make sure you read the label because there are different chemicals. Some dry lubes actually use a graphite, so you wouldn't want to use those outside. So again, dry lube is great, but know what the chemical is in your dry lube. And, I would always recommend a Teflon or PTFE. Silicone is another category, and silicone is just designed to make things slippery. What's great about silicone is you can use it on wood, leather, rubber, vinyl, plastic, metal. I mean, it just does a nice job making things slippery, and especially metal to metal. It does a great job. And then we talked about spraying it on snow shovels and the chutes on snow blowers. Does a really great job. I think that's a great routine to get into. And then you have lithium grease. So that's a thick paste, stands up to heavy pressure, extreme temperatures. It's long lasting because it doesn't evaporate and move off like some other oils, and then it protects whatever you put it on from moisture.
So now that we've discussed the types of lubricants, where should you use what?
So for a couple routines, like for your car, I think that every year, especially if you're in an area where it freezes in the winter, every year you should lower your windows and then spray a dry lube with Teflon in the channels of the window. And then the weather strip all around the doors, you should spray that with a silicone. And
what episode did I talk about my mom running into the car door?
You talk about your parents a lot
I am.
and all the things they do wrong.
Well, it's great because they're never going to hear it.
And then with your...
Kids are really interested in what I do.
Yeah, that's nice. And now you really can't share it.
No, yeah, too bad.
And then for your door locks, you should spray it with either a Teflon spray or Larry from Liquid Wrench. He has a new product that they have for car locks. Mm-hmm. Your hood latch, your trunk latch, and then the door hinges, you can use a lithium grease. Mm-hmm. What's great about the lithium grease is it's going to stay on that hinge. It's not going to evaporate. It stands up to pressure, and then it protects that metal there from rust and corrosion.
How about a squeaky door hinge?
Okay, so for outside, I wouldn't use graphite because it's going to make a mess, and you need to keep graphite dry. So outside, I would use either silicone or a dry lube with Teflon in it. Inside, a trick you can do is pound out all of the pins, remove them, wipe them down, and then spray those with silicone, wipe the hinges clean, get any dirt buildup off there. And this isn't a bad place to use a liquid oil, like a multi-purpose oil, because it's going to stay in place. It's going to keep it from corroding. And then when you put a couple drops in there, you'd want to wipe that down real well with a rag.
So this is like a 3-in-1 oil?
It would work great on interior doors, yeah. For wood drawers that aren't sliding real easy, so wood on wood, like especially antiques, beeswax actually is a nice lubricant. I didn't include that in my 6 I described, but my mom always used beeswax for a lot of her antiques. You know what's wild is it takes 1,000 flowers to make 1 drop of beeswax.
Wow! And
they have used beeswax for centuries in furniture polish. Museums have used it to protect wood, and it also protects and lubricates metal.
So, like in the hardware store, though, most likely this is not going to be in the lubrication aisle, right?
Usually they will merchandise it by the screws.
Right, because that makes sense.
Well, it lubricates screws. So if you have wood screws that you're putting into hard wood,
right, you
can rub beeswax on the screw, and it makes it go into the wood much easier. It reduces the amount of friction. Mm-hmm. So, that's the key thing with a lubricant. And what's nice is it doesn't attract or hold moisture. So it's really a nice lubricant, and it protects against moisture. And did you know the ancient Egyptians used beeswax for creating molds, and then they would pour metal into it to create their statues? And they're able to just peel it away?
No, I didn't know that.
Interesting, huh?
Mm-hmm.
For metal drawers that have metal slides, you can use a dry lube, a silicone, or an all-purpose oil. For plastic drawers with the plastic slides, you can use a dry lube, and Teflon does a great job on plastic to plastic.
So I think one of the biggest problems around your house is your sliding glass door.
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't have to be a glass door, does it?
Yeah. Yeah, sliding patio doors?
Yes.
So they get muddy, they get all kinds of debris in there.
Well, and the tracks, there's dead bugs.
Yeah, it gets terrible.
Yeah, it's gross.
One of the best things to do is actually take the doors off, and then you can really clean it thoroughly. But, it's difficult for some people. What you want to do is vacuum thoroughly, wipe it down, and then you can use a wire brush or a toothbrush and clean real well in those tracks. One trick one of the manufacturers suggested is using denatured alcohol to clean that down with a rag, because it's just an amazing solvent. It dissolves grease, it breaks down any buildup of dirt, and then it evaporates very quickly. So rather than, if you don't have denatured alcohol, you can use soapy water and a rag, but you need to make sure that's very dry before you put your lubricant on. And you need to make sure that you're doing this in adequate ventilation. You don't want to use this with the door shut on the inside of the track because it's toxic and flammable. But denatured alcohol, it will remove ink stains from hard surfaces, so it's really a nice solvent. And then once it's thoroughly cleaned, you want to use either a silicone or a dry lube with Teflon in it.
I think one of the biggest problems with sliding glass doors or sliding patio doors is that people don't clean the tracks before they lube it up. They they spray the lubricant down, and then it just keeps attracting more and more dirt.
Right. And if you use a dry lube, it's not as bad because that'll dry to a powder. But if you're using silicone, which a lot of manufacturers recommend, and it does a great job, if you have dirt in the track, you're just now going to pull all that into there, especially if you have wheels with ball bearings. You can end up damaging or fouling up those bearings. So it's important that you clean it before you use a lube.
So another area in your house that you're going to use a lubricant is for your garage door?
And garage doors are very interesting because when we first started in hardware, they always recommended using white lithium grease in the tracks and the rollers. But they found that over the years it collects dust and dirt and debris in there, and especially the bearings and the wheels. It would foul them up and can damage them. So then, probably, I don't know, about 10 years ago, they started talking about just, don't use lithium grease anymore. Put 1 or 2 drops of motor oil in the bearings, which is difficult to execute.
Yeah.
How do you easily get motor oil in there? And now almost all the manufacturers are suggesting a dry lubricant with either a Teflon spray or, and on the inside you can use a dry lube with a graphite also. But you're looking for something that goes on wet so that you can get inside there and then it dries to a powder.
Which Liquid Wrench does a really nice job of their packaging, and it says on it specifically for garage doors. There,
makes it
all the different types of lubricants that they sell.
Makes it easy to buy for a project.
Right. Yeah.
For padlocks that you have outside, Master Lock suggests that once a year you blow out the cylinder with compressed air, and then you clean the cylinder with WD-40 or brake cleaner.
That's weird.
Yeah, brake cleaner. It's the same fluid that they use for dry cleaning. And again, highly toxic, so make sure you're using it outside. And then they say only use a small amount of dry lubricant for the cylinder. They don't want you to use oil, dry graphite, or silicone because it attracts dust. And then for O-rings, so anywhere you're using O-rings in the house, let's say you're changing a cartridge for your plumbing, you should definitely be putting a plumber's grease on this, so it's a silicone-based grease. On O-rings, you never want to use any petroleum-based products because they'll swell up and it'll shorten the life of the O-ring. And, a lot of the old plumbers used to use Vaseline because it really makes it easy to push the cartridges back in, but then they found that after years of looking at this that it breaks down the O-rings. But, lubricating your O-rings, it just keeps you from, especially if you're putting a new cartridge into an old faucet, you're not going to nick it up with that little mineral and rust buildup that is in the faucet itself. For bike chains, you can use 3-in-1 oil because it's designed to lubricate, prevent rust, and clean off the chain.
Yeah, duh.
And you can also buy a specific chain lube. What's nice about this is formulated for high friction. Also, it's designed so it doesn't come off the chain, so it's not thin. It stays in place. So it's really a nice product for that.
So those are the main projects around the house that you would use lubricants. What about, garden equipment?
I think that, like your hedge trimmer, one thing I always do is every time I use it, because that sap builds up, I would, like an electric hedge trimmer, I would put a spray silicone on the blades every time I use it. Like pruners, the same way. I'd use a silicone. Your mailbox door, axes, wheelbarrow beds, I like to spray with silicone. Again, I always talk about shovels, saws. I always sprayed down my extension ladders too when we were doing all our jobs, when we were doing all the investing, and we were using these extension ladders. I would tar these roofs, and I'd get tar and stuff all on these ladders. And I found that when I took these old ladders and I soaked them in silicone, that they just were able to work much better.
So what do you mean, like the sides of it?
Yeah, where the groove is, where where metal touches metal and slides.
So not like the steps where you're going to slip off?
Good call. Yeah, don't spray silicone out because silicone makes stuff slippery.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what the heck are you talking about?
Very good. So we talked to Larry from Liquid Wrench, and he has some great tips on some of their products.
Larry, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Cindy and I were talking this week about different types of lubricants, and one question we had was if there's some basic mistakes that homeowners make when they're using lubricants.
Well, probably the biggest mistake people make is that they think they can go buy one can of lube and use it for everything around the home.
Okay.
And that's just not true. You wouldn't try to take out a spark plug out of your car with a crescent wrench. You'd get the right tool for the job. And that's why the Liquid Wrench line has got more than one tool. There's more than one Liquid Wrench. If you want to spray a vinyl window to slide it up and down and you don't want a sticky wet lube there that'll collect dust, use Liquid Wrench Dry Lube because it dries to a non-tacky film. If you're looking for a lubricant for a ceiling fan or something like that where you want it to stay wet and keep the bearings lubricated, Liquid Wrench lubricating oil is what you want to use for that kind of application. We've got a penetrating oil that's designed specifically to loosen rusted nuts and bolts. Could you use a standard lubricant for that kind of thing? Well, yeah, but it won't cut through the rust and crud and grease on the part. You'll use a whole can to use what a few squirts of liquid wrench penetrating oil will do. The key is to pick the right tool for the right job, just like you do around the shop and around the garage.
And I was curious with the penetrating oil. Now, with penetrating oil, does that oil actually follow the threads?
Yes, it does. It's designed to have real low surface tension, which means it soaks into nooks and crannies really well. If you think of that surface on the bolt and on the nut that's rusted in place like two pieces of, well, like an English muffin with a real rough surface on it.
Okay.
That penetrating oil is designed to soak into that very quickly and loosen it up. It's got solvency that a regular lubricant doesn't have. It's meant to be more of a solvent than a lubricant. That's why you can't interchange the two. A lubricant will never work as well as a penetrating oil, and a penetrating oil is not meant to be a long-term lubricant. It's to loosen rusted nuts and bolts.
Interesting. What are the key products that every homeowner should have?
I'm particularly fond of a dry lube around the home because it doesn't leave any messy residue. So a liquid wrench dry lube is great for things like the little rollers and the drawer slides in your kitchen drawers and vinyl window tracks and even inside locks. Although we now have a lock and hinge lube with a metered valve on it that puts one small squirt of lube inside the lock. So instead of it spraying all over the place when you try to lube a hinge or a lock, it just puts out just a few drops at a time, so it's a whole lot less messy.
Yeah, very smart. Wow, I like that idea a lot.
We're particularly proud of that because we're the first company in the market with a metered valve. It's kind of like the valves they use in inhalers that put out a metered dose, or some air fresheners that put out just one spritz per push of the button.
Sure.
That's what we're using for the new liquid wrench lock and hinge lube.
Very interesting.
We've got a garage door lube that's brand new on the market, and you use it in the tracks of your garage door, even lubricate the coil spring above the garage door to keep it from grinding and making squeaky noises as the garage door goes up and down. And it dries dry as well to keep from picking up dust and dirt and the cobwebs and the schmutz that would normally blow through a garage door. It's also got a corrosion inhibitor in it to help protect the tracks and the rollers from corrosion. And we just recently came out with a lubricant with a de-icer formula in it for up north for folks who want to who still have outdoor locks like padlocks, and even on the front of your house you can get ice formation in the wintertime, and this will de-ice and lubricate the lock at the same time. And that's in a handy aerosol can as well.
And that's good for automobiles also?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we're in the Chicago area. We have our share of frozen car locks.
Oh, it works like a charm. In addition to that, we've got an aerosol lithium grease and an aerosol silicone spray and a chain lube. All of them designed to do specific jobs extremely well rather than trying to make one size fit all. We believe that having the right tool for the job makes it easier to use, a lot less messy, and a lot more effective long run.
So if you're going to pick the top couple of products that you think every homeowner should have in their toolbox, what would that be?
I would have penetrating oil for those jobs around the home, particularly if you work on your own cars. You're always needing that. Even if you just want to take out a spark plug in the spring from your lawnmower, you need to have penetrating oil. The lock and hinge lube I'm particularly fond of because it's handy around the home and it's low odor and it puts out just enough material to do the job. You don't have to worry about overspray and a slippery, stinky mess. And I'm very fond, and it's very effective, the dry lube for all sorts of things around the home because there's no messy residue, no liquid left behind when the solvent evaporates from the dry lube. So if I were going to pick three things to have around the house all the time, it would be those three.
Wonderful. If I wanted to find out more about your products, where would I go?
Liquidwrench.com is our website, and we also have a website, we sponsor a website called Tinker Nation that talks a lot about the kind of things that people are using liquid wrench for.
Excellent. All right, well, I appreciate your time. Thank you, Larry.
Well, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was a great interview.
I really liked how he emphasized pick the right product for the project. Mm-hmm. And then, I kind of put him into corners saying, what are your top three? So penetrating oil, his lock and hinge, and a dry lube. I would add silicone to that, and you can pretty much handle any project around the house.
So I think the key thing to this episode is you really need more than one kind of lubricant in your house.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, to do the job right. So, and I'm really interested in that lock and hinge. What a cool concept that it just puts out a tiny little shot. It's metered. So, yeah, I'd like to check that out.
So is that it?
If you want to subscribe, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Was that smooth?
Yeah, it's a great transition. If you enjoyed this episode, or any of them, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
You can subscribe to that as well.
If you want to email us, you can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.